The pen trembled in her fingers like a small frightened creature. Elena Carter sat alone at the polished conference table, staring at the document that would end her marriage. 3 years of her life reduced to signatures and legal language. 3 years of hope transformed into neat paragraphs about asset division and confidentiality clauses. Betrayed by her husband's family, she was signing the divorce, not knowing her father-in-law was the Mafia boss. The Manhattan law firm occupied the 47th floor of a building that touched the clouds. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Eleanor could see the city spread beneath her like a map of possibilities she would never explore. The October sky hung grey and heavy, promising rain that had not yet fallen. Her husband sat across from her, scrolling through his phone with the casual indifference of someone waiting for a minor inconvenience to conclude. Marcus Carter had stopped pretending to care about her feelings approximately 18 months into their marriage. Now he did not even pretend to notice she existed. Elena remembered the woman she had been before him, 26 years old, full of dreams and determination, working as an interior designer in a small Brooklyn firm. She had met Marcus at a charity gala in the Hamptons, where she was attending as the guest of a college friend who moved in circles far above her own station. He had been charming that night, devastatingly charming, with storm-grey eyes and a smile that promised adventure. He had pursued her with an intensity that left her breathless. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to places she had only seen in magazines, flowers delivered daily until her tiny apartment overflowed with roses. She had fallen completely and foolishly in love. The warning signs had been there from the beginning, but she had chosen to ignore them. The way his mother, Victoria Carter, had assessed her during their first meeting, a slow examination from head to toe, followed by a smile that never reached her eyes. The way his sister, Camilla, had asked pointed questions about her background, her education, her family's financial situation. The way his father, Dominic Carter, had remained silent throughout dinner, watching her with an expression she could not decipher. Elena had convinced herself it was normal. Wealthy families were protective of their sons. She would prove herself worthy in time. How naive she had been. The wedding had been beautiful. Ceremony at the Carter estate in Connecticut, with 300 guests and flowers imported from Holland. Eleanor had walked down the aisle feeling like a princess entering her fairy tale, not realizing she was walking into a carefully constructed cage. The first year had been manageable. Marcus traveled frequently for business, leaving her alone in their penthouse apartment. When he was home, he was distracted and distant, always checking his phone or disappearing for hours without explanation. She told herself he was working hard to build their future together. By the second year, the cracks in her fairy tale had become canyons. Victoria began inserting herself into every aspect of their lives. She criticized Elena's decorating choices, her cooking, her wardrobe, her inability to host proper dinner parties for the right people. She suggested repeatedly that Elena was not suited to carry the Carter name. She planted seeds of doubt in Marcus's mind, watering them with carefully chosen words until they bloomed into full-grown resentment. Camilla was worse. She spread rumors among their social circle, painting Eleanor as a gold digger who had trapped Marcus through manipulation. She excluded Eleanor from family gatherings, claiming miscommunication about dates and times. She smiled sweetly to Elena's face while systematically destroying her reputation behind her back. And Marcus had done nothing. He dismissed Elena's concerns as paranoia. He told her she was being too sensitive. He sided with his mother and sister at every turn, until Elena began to wonder if perhaps she truly was the problem. The third year had brought the end. Marcus stopped coming home most nights. He stopped pretending to care about their anniversary, her birthday, the holidays they had once celebrated together. He stopped looking at her like she was his wife, and started looking at her like she was an obligation he resented. Then came the ultimatum. Victoria had summoned Eleanor to the family estate. 3 months ago, sitting her down in the formal living room like a queen addressing a peasant who had overstayed her welcome. The message had been brutally clear. Eleanor would file for divorce and walk away quietly, or the Carter family would destroy her completely. They would ensure she never worked in design again. They would make certain every door in the city closed in her face. They would take everything she had built and reduce it to ashes. Eleanor had thought about fighting. She had. Consulted lawyers, researched her options, tried to find a way to protect herself. But the Carters were powerful in ways she had not fully understood. Their reach extended into every corner of New York society. Their wealth bought silence and loyalty in equal measure. In the end, she had no choice but to surrender. Now she sat in this cold conference room, preparing to sign away 3 years of her life in exchange for a settlement that would barely cover 6 months of rent. No alimony, no stake, in the Carter businesses. Just enough money to make her disappear without making noise. The family attorney cleared his throat, a grey-haired man in an expensive suit with the practiced sympathy of someone who facilitated the destruction of inconvenient people as part of his regular duties. Elena picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she brought it to the paper. She thought about all the mornings she had woken up alone in a bed too large for one person, all the dinners she had eaten in silence, while Marcus worked late or simply did not come home, all the times she had cried in the bathroom so he would not hear her grief. She signed her name in careful letters. The attorney gathered the papers with efficient movements, sliding them into a leather folder. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, his expression showing only bored relief that this tedious business was finally concluded. That was when Elena noticed the man standing in the doorway. She had not heard him enter. He stood, perfectly still, watching the scene with eyes that seemed to absorb every detail without revealing anything in return. He was tall, with silver hair swept back from a face that had aged into something distinguished rather than diminished. His suit was impeccable, his posture commanding, his presence filling the room in ways that made the attorney straighten unconsciously. Dominic Carter, her father-in-law, the man who had barely spoken to her in 3 years of marriage. He walked into the room with measured steps, and Elena noticed something she had never observed before. The way the attorney's hands trembled slightly as he clutched the folder. The way Marcus's casual indifference shifted into something closer to nervous attention. The way the air itself seemed to grow heavier with each step Dominic took toward the table. He stopped beside them, looking down at Elena with an expression she still could not read. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then Dominic turned to his son. His voice was quiet when he spoke, but there was something beneath the words that made Elena's pulse quicken, a current of authority that demanded attention, a weight that suggested consequences for those who failed to satisfy. He asked Marcus about the settlement terms. Marcus answered quickly, too quickly, his words tumbling over each other in a way that revealed his discomfort. He explained the arrangement, the modest payment, the confidentiality clause, the requirement that Elena never speak publicly about the Carter family or their affairs. Dominic listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Dominic turned back to Elena. He studied her face for a moment, as though searching for something hidden beneath her careful composure. Then he did something that surprised her completely. He apologized, not for the divorce, not for the inadequate settlement, but for the way she had been treated during her marriage, for the cruelty she had endured at the hands of his wife and daughter, for the failure of his son to be the husband she had deserved. Elena did not know how to respond. In 3 years, no member of the Carter family had ever acknowledged her pain. No one had ever suggested that she might be the victim rather than the problem that needed solving. Dominic reached into his jacket and produced a business card. He placed it on the table in front of her, his movements precise and unhurried. He told her that if she ever needed anything, truly needed anything, she should call the number on that card. He told her that despite what his family had done, she was not entirely without allies in this world. He told her that sometimes justice arrived through unexpected doors. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Elena staring at the card in confusion. Marcus scoffed once his father was gone, dismissing the gesture as the sentimentality of an old man losing his edge. The attorney resumed organizing paperwork. The moment passed as though it had never happened. But Elena slipped the card into her pocket. She left the law firm 30 minutes later, stepping out onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk with nothing but her purse and a check that represented the complete sum of her failed marriage. The October air was crisp against her face, carrying the smell of street food and exhaust and the particular energy of the city in autumn. She began walking with no destination in mind. Her apartment, the cramped studio she had moved into after leaving the penthouse, was 20 blocks away. She could take the subway, but she needed air. She needed movement. She needed to feel her feet on solid ground while her mind processed everything that had happened. The afternoon faded into evening as she walked. The city transformed around her, daytime crowds giving way to nighttime energy. Restaurants filled with laughter. Bars spilled music onto sidewalks. Couples walked hand in hand, absorbed in their own private worlds of connection. Elena had never felt more alone. She stopped at a small park, sinking onto a bench beneath a streetlight. The trees had begun to change color, leaves turning shades of gold and crimson that seemed almost too beautiful for her current state of mind. She pulled out the business card Dominic had given her, turning it over in her hands. The card was simple. Heavy cream paper with a single phone number embossed in black. No name, no company. No indication of what calling that number might summon into her life. She should throw it away. The Carters had taken enough from her already. She wanted nothing more to do with that family, not even the one member who had shown her an unexpected moment of kindness. But something made her keep it. She tucked the card back into her pocket and continued walking through the darkening city. By the time she reached her apartment, night had fully descended over Manhattan. The building was old, a walk-up in a neighborhood that was charming by daylight and questionable after dark. She climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, her legs aching from the long walk, her heart aching from everything else. Her apartment was exactly as she had left it that morning, small, sparse, filled with boxes she had not yet found the energy to unpack. The furniture was second-hand, the kitchen barely functional, the view from the single window a brick wall 3 feet away. This was her life now. Eleanor made herself tea and sat on the worn couch, staring at nothing while the cup grew cold in her hands. She thought about her future, and the emptiness of it threatened to swallow her whole. No job prospects beyond freelance work that barely paid bills, no savings beyond the meager settlement, no family to call. Her parents had passed years ago and she had no siblings, no friends who had not already chosen the Carters over her. She was completely and utterly alone in the world. The tears came then, silent and relentless, streaming down her face in the dim light of her single lamp. She cried for the woman she had been before Marcus Carter had entered her life. She cried for the dreams she had buried trying to make her marriage work. She cried for all the years she would never recover. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollow but strangely calm. She pulled out the business card again, examining the number in the light. Her thumb hovered over her phone screen. What did she have to lose at this point? She dialed before she could change her mind. The phone rang twice before someone answered. A woman's voice, professional and neutral, asked how she could direct the call. Elena hesitated. She did not know what to say. She did not even know why she was calling. Finally, she gave Dominic Carter's name. She explained that he had given her this number. She identified herself as Elena Carter. No, Elena Mitchell, she corrected, reclaiming her maiden name. She admitted she did not know why she was calling, only that she had nowhere else to turn for help. There was a pause on the line. Then the woman asked her to hold. Classical music played softly, elegant, the kind that filled lobbies of expensive hotels. Elena waited with her heart pounding for reasons she could not entirely explain. A new voice came on the line, male, deep, with a hint of an accent she could not place. He introduced himself as someone who worked closely with Mr. Carter. He asked if Elena was safe. He asked if she had somewhere to stay tonight. He asked detailed questions about her situation that seemed strange coming from a complete stranger. Questions about her needs, her circumstances, her immediate concerns. Eleanor answered honestly. She did not know why, but something about the voice made her feel that honesty was not just expected but essential. When she finished, there was another pause. Then the man told her that someone would contact her within 24 hours. He told her not to worry about her immediate needs. He told her that Mr. Carter took care of those under his protection. The line went dead before she could ask what any of that meant. Eleanor sat in her dark apartment, holding her phone, wondering what she had just set into motion. She did not sleep that night. Every sound from the street made her jump. Every creak of the old building felt like a warning. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the business card on her nightstand like a talisman whose power she did not yet understand. When morning came, grey and cold, through her single window, she dragged herself out of bed and made coffee. She had no plans for the day, no appointments, no obligations, just endless hours stretching before her like an empty road leading nowhere. Then came the knock at her door. She froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. No one knocked on her door. She had no visitors expected, no deliveries scheduled, no reason for anyone to seek her out. Another knock, firmer this time. She set down her cup and approached the door, slowly, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She looked through the peephole and saw a woman standing in the hallway, well dressed in a tailored coat, carrying a leather briefcase with an expression of patient professionalism. Elena opened the door a crack, leaving the chain attached. The woman smiled warmly. She introduced herself as Catherine, an associate of Mr. Dominic Carter. She apologized for the early hour and the lack of advance notice. She asked if Elena had a few minutes to discuss matters of mutual interest. Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities and concerns. She thought about refusing, about closing the door and pretending this was all some strange dream. But curiosity overcame caution. She let Catherine inside. What followed was the strangest conversation Elena had ever experienced. Catherine explained that Dominic Carter had been observing Elena's situation for some time with growing concern. He had witnessed how his wife and daughter treated her. He had watched his son fail repeatedly as a husband. He had seen many things the rest of his family believed were hidden from his view. Dominic wanted to help her. Not purely from guilt, Catherine clarified, though guilt was certainly part of his motivation. But because Dominic believed Elena had been wronged by his family, and he was a man who valued justice, even when justice conflicted with the interests of his own blood. Elena listened with growing confusion and disbelief. None of this made sense. Why would her father-in-law care about her welfare? Why would he go to such lengths to help someone his family had so thoroughly discarded? Catherine seemed to sense her questions before she voiced them. She paused, choosing her next words with obvious care. There were things about the Carter family, she said slowly, that Elena did not know. Things that would fundamentally change her understanding of everything she had experienced during her marriage. Things that Dominic wanted to tell her, himself, when she was ready to hear them. For now, Catherine was there to offer practical assistance. A new apartment, already arranged, in a safer neighborhood with better security. A position at a design firm owned by one of Dominic's associates, with colleagues who would treat her with respect. A modest monthly stipend to cover her expenses while she rebuilt the life that had been taken from her. No strings attached, Catherine emphasized. Elena could accept the help and never contact the Carters again if she wished. Or she could accept the help and, when she felt ready, learn the truth about the family she had married into and subsequently divorced. The choice belonged entirely to her. Elena sat in stunned silence for a long moment. She thought about her nearly empty bank account, her dead-end professional prospects, her tiny apartment with its questionable safety and depressing view of brick. She thought about the pride that told her to refuse any charity from the family that had worked so hard to destroy her. And she thought about the curiosity that had kept her awake through the entire night. She asked Catherine one question. Why should she trust any of this? Catherine's answer was surprisingly simple. She should trust it because Dominic Carter was a man who kept his word without exception. Because whatever Elena thought she knew about the Carter family, the full truth was far more complicated than she could imagine, and because sometimes the only way forward was to accept help from unexpected sources. Elena made her decision. She would accept the apartment and the job offer. She would rebuild her life on her own terms while using their assistance. And when she was ready, if she ever felt ready, she would learn what secrets the Carter family had been hiding from the world. Catherine smiled, as though she had expected nothing less from Elena. The arrangements proceeded with remarkable speed. Within a single week, Elena found herself settled in a new apartment on the Upper West Side, small but elegant, with real windows that let in actual sunlight, and a kitchen that functioned properly. She started her position at a boutique design firm where her colleagues treated her with genuine respect and appreciation for her talents. She began, slowly and carefully, to remember who she had been before Marcus Carter had entered her life and dismantled everything she had built. But the questions never stopped circling through her mind during quiet moments. What did Dominic know that the rest of his family did not? What truth was waiting for her when she finally felt ready to hear it? And why did she sense, with growing certainty, that her story with the Carter family was far from reaching its conclusion? Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. These stories take you on emotional journeys that stay with you long after the final words. Subscribe now so you never miss the next chapter of a story that might change how you see betrayal, resilience, and the unexpected paths to justice. 3 months passed like water slipping through open fingers. Eleanor settled into her new existence with the cautious optimism of someone who had learned through painful experience to expect disappointment. She woke each morning in her sunlit apartment, made coffee in her properly functioning kitchen, and walked to work through streets that felt progressively safer with each passing day. She was healing slowly, in the manner that broken things heal when given adequate time and proper care. The design firm proved to be a revelation after years of stagnation. Her colleagues were talented and driven, but also genuinely kind, a combination she had forgotten could exist after her years in the Carter orbit. Her supervisor, a woman named Margaret who favored bold colors and even bolder opinions, took Elena under her wing without ever making it feel like charity or obligation. Elena threw herself into professional work with desperate energy. She redesigned living rooms and bedrooms and kitchens, pouring all her suppressed creativity into spaces that would hold other people's happiness. She stayed late at the office, arrived early in the mornings, volunteered for projects that no one else wanted to tackle. She was proving something to herself, though she could not articulate exactly what that something was. The Carter settlement money remained untouched in her bank account. She lived entirely on her salary, as though using their money would somehow validate everything they had done to her. It was perhaps irrational, but it was the only form of resistance she had left to exercise. She did not hear from Dominic Carter during those months. Catherine had provided a number to call if Elena ever needed anything, but Elena never used it. She wanted to believe she could survive entirely on her own terms, without depending on the mysterious generosity of her former father-in-law. She wanted to prove that the Carter family had not destroyed her. They had only temporarily delayed her. But the questions about Dominic's secrets remained persistent. They surfaced at unexpected moments, while she was sketching designs at her drafting table, or riding the subway through underground tunnels, or lying awake in the dark hours before dawn arrived. What did Dominic know that was so important? What truth was he waiting to share with her? Why had he helped her when every other member of his family wanted her completely erased? She pushed the questions away each time they arose uninvited. She had more immediate concerns demanding her attention: bills to pay, deadlines to meet, a career and life to rebuild from the ground up. Then came the gala invitation. Margaret announced it on a Tuesday morning, her voice carrying the particular excitement of someone who lived for social events and professional opportunities combined. A major charity fundraiser at the Metropolitan Museum, benefiting children's education, programs throughout the city. The firm had been selected to handle the complete event design, and Margaret wanted Elena specifically to lead the project. It represented a tremendous opportunity. The kind of career-defining moment Elena had dreamed about before her marriage had derailed everything she had been building. She accepted immediately, her mind already cataloguing potential color schemes and floral arrangements. It was only later that afternoon that she learned the identity of the event's primary sponsor, the Carter Foundation. Elena stared at the email containing the detailed guest list, her coffee growing cold and forgotten beside her keyboard. Victoria Carter was listed as the honorary chair of the event committee. Camilla Carter served on the planning board. Marcus Carter was expected to attend with his new girlfriend, a socialite named Brittany, whose Instagram account Elena had definitely not been checking obsessively. She could withdraw from the project. She could cite personal conflicts of interest, hand the work to a capable colleague, avoid the entire uncomfortable situation. Margaret would understand, or at least accept, whatever reasonable excuse Elena chose to offer. But something deep within her rebelled against that cowardly option. Why should she hide from them? Why should she give the Carters the satisfaction of knowing they still possessed power over her choices and her life? She had done nothing wrong throughout her marriage. She had simply loved the wrong person and trusted the wrong family. She would attend the gala. She would execute her professional duties brilliantly. And she would demonstrate to Victoria and Camilla and Marcus that she had survived their coordinated cruelty with her dignity completely intact. The next 6 weeks disappeared into a blur of intense planning and meticulous preparation. Elena worked harder than she had ever worked in her professional life, obsessing over every detail of the event design. The main exhibition hall would feature cascading installations of white orchids illuminated by warm golden light. The silent auction area would evoke the atmosphere of a romantic Venetian garden. The dinner space would transform the museum's classical architecture into something simultaneously timeless and thoroughly modern. Margaret observed her efforts with growing admiration and growing concern about her well-being. She pulled Elena aside one afternoon, approximately 2 weeks before the scheduled event. She knew about Elena's complicated history with the Carter family, Margaret said gently. Not all the painful details, but enough to understand why this particular project might prove emotionally challenging. She wanted to ensure Elena was participating for the right professional reasons rather than unhealthy personal ones. Elena considered the question seriously before formulating her response. She was not pursuing this for revenge, she said finally. She was not trying to prove anything, specifically to the Carters. She was doing this because it was her job, and she excelled at her job, and she absolutely refused to let her painful past dictate the boundaries of her professional future. Margaret studied her face for a long moment, then nodded with apparent satisfaction. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in early December cold. Eleanor dressed with extraordinary care in her apartment, selecting a gown she had discovered at a vintage shop in Brooklyn, emerald green silk that draped elegantly without demanding excessive attention. She wanted to appear professional and polished, nearly invisible. She was attending to work, not to make any kind of personal statement. But when she examined her reflection in the full-length mirror, she observed something she had not expected to see. She looked genuinely strong, not in the aggressive manner of someone spoiling for confrontation, but in the quiet way of someone who had survived something genuinely difficult and emerged, transformed on the other side. Her eyes were clear and focused. Her posture was straight and confident. Her hands remained perfectly steady. She could absolutely do this. The Metropolitan Museum glowed magnificently against the night sky as Elena's taxi approached the entrance. Guests were already arriving in waves, emerging from black cars amid clouds of expensive perfume and designer fabric. Elena bypassed the main entrance entirely, heading directly for the service area, where the catering team was staging operations. The next 3 hours passed in a state of controlled professional chaos. Elena moved through the event like a conductor directing an orchestra, adjusting flower arrangements here, repositioning lighting elements there, solving emerging problems before they could escalate into actual crises. She remained consistently in the background, communicating through her earpiece with team members scattered strategically throughout the venue. She caught glimpses of the Carter family from safe distances. Victoria, resplendent in silver as always, holding court near the main entrance and accepting compliments. Camilla, photographing everything obsessively for social media, her smile as sharp and calculated as her prominent cheekbones. Marcus looking thoroughly bored beside a blonde woman who laughed too loudly at things that were not actually funny. Elena felt surprisingly nothing when she saw them. She had expected pain or anger, or at least the bitter satisfaction of watching them from her new position of professional strength. Instead, she felt only vague disconnection, as though observing strangers who happened to share names with people she had once known intimately. She was genuinely free of them, truly and completely free, not because they had released her from bondage, but because she had released herself through her own determination. The realization settled over her consciousness like a warm and comforting blanket. Then she noticed Dominic. He stood alone near one of her orchid installations, studying the carefully arranged flowers with an expression of quiet and genuine appreciation. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but he carried it like armor rather than mere decoration. His silver hair caught the golden light beautifully, and for a suspended moment he appeared almost otherworldly. He turned as though sensing her observation, and their eyes met across the crowded room. Elena's breath caught, involuntarily, in her throat. She should look away immediately. She should return to her professional duties, maintain the careful distance that had gotten her successfully through the evening. She owed Dominic gratitude, perhaps, but she owed him nothing more substantial. But instead of looking away as wisdom suggested, she found herself walking toward him through the crowd. They met beside the orchids, two people who had no legitimate business conversing with each other, surrounded by guests who would gossip enthusiastically for weeks if they noticed. Dominic spoke first. He complimented the event design with words that carried genuine appreciation rather than empty social flattery. He mentioned that the orchids reminded him of a garden he had visited once in Singapore, where flowers grew in impossible profusion against all reasonable expectations. Eleanor thanked him sincerely for the compliment. She thanked him also for the substantial help he had provided. The apartment, the job, opportunity, the chance to rebuild her shattered life. She had not touched the stipend he offered, she admitted, but everything else had made a difference she could never adequately express in words. Dominic nodded slowly, clearly unsurprised by her choices. He had expected nothing less from her character, he said. She was proud, and pride was not always a character flaw. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept a person standing upright when the entire world conspired to push them down. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by the noise of the party, but wrapped in their own private stillness. Then Dominic asked if she had considered his offer. Eleanor understood immediately what he meant. The truth he had promised to eventually share, the secrets about the Carter family that would supposedly change everything she thought she understood. She had thought about it constantly, she admitted, every single day for 3 months, but she had not felt ready to hear whatever he needed to tell her. Dominic waited patiently. She believed she was ready now, Eleanor said finally. Whatever the truth turned out to be, whatever it changed about her understanding, she genuinely wanted to know it. Dominic's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a softening around his eyes, a slight relaxation of his shoulders. He suggested they arrange to meet the following week, somewhere private and secure where they could speak without any possibility of interruption. He would tell her everything she needed to know, and then she could decide what to do with that knowledge. Eleanor agreed to his proposal. They parted without fanfare or prolonged farewell, Dominic returning to the social obligations that his position demanded, Eleanor returning to the professional obligations of her role. No one appeared to have noticed their private conversation. The gala continued flowing around them, completely unaware that something significant had just transpired. The rest of the evening passed in a professional blur. Elena completed her remaining duties on autopilot, her mind racing with anticipation and anxiety about what lay ahead. What could Dominic possibly tell her that would fundamentally change her understanding of the Carter family? What secrets could be so important that he had waited months for her to feel prepared to receive them? She did not encounter the Carters again that night. They departed early, Victoria complaining audibly of a headache. Marcus, trailing behind with his girlfriend like a forgotten accessory he had neglected to remove. When the last guest finally departed and the cleanup operations began, Elena slipped quietly away into the December night. The cold air hit her face like a bracing wake-up call. She walked through the park surrounding the museum, her heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement, her breath forming small clouds that vanished in the darkness. She felt like she was standing at the very edge of something, vast and completely unknowable. Whatever came next would fundamentally change her life. She felt certain of that truth now. The only remaining question was whether the coming change would destroy her completely or finally set her free. She chose deliberately to believe it would be the latter. The following Tuesday, Eleanor received a text message from an unknown number, an address in Westchester, a time 7 in the evening, a single instruction: come alone and tell no one. She informed no one of her destination. Margaret believed she had a routine doctor's appointment. Her few new friends assumed she was working late at the office. She took a train from Grand Central Station, watching through the window as the city gradually gave way to suburbs, then to countryside, then to the kind of established wealth that never needed to announce itself. The address belonged to a house, not the main Carter estate she remembered, but a smaller property set back from the road behind iron gates. Elena provided her name to the intercom system, and the gates swung open silently to admit her. The house was beautiful in an understated and elegant way. Old stone walls covered in climbing ivy, windows glowing with warm interior light, formal gardens that even in winter suggested careful and loving attention. Elena approached the front door with her heart pounding audibly. Dominic answered the door himself. He looked different away from the gala's grandeur, more human somehow, dressed in casual clothes with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. He welcomed her inside with genuine warmth, leading her through a book-lined foyer to a sitting room where a fire crackled invitingly in the stone hearth. He offered her tea, which she accepted more for something to occupy her nervous hands than from any actual thirst. They settled into leather armchairs facing each other, the fire casting dancing shadows across the walls and ceiling. Dominic did not waste precious time with meaningless small talk. He began by asking what Elena actually knew about the Carter family's various business interests. She answered honestly. She understood they were extraordinarily wealthy, that their money derived from real estate holdings and diverse investments, that they moved in circles of power and influence she had never fully comprehended. Dominic nodded slowly at her response. That was the public narrative, he explained, the version that appeared in newspapers and business publications, the version that Victoria and Camilla mostly believed because he had worked extremely hard over decades to keep them ignorant of deeper truths. The complete reality was considerably more complicated. He paused, gathering his thoughts, or perhaps summoning his courage to continue. The Carter fortune, he continued carefully, had not been built on real estate alone. It had been constructed upon a foundation that extended back generations, a foundation of power, influence, and activities that operated entirely outside the boundaries of conventional law. Elena felt the room grow noticeably colder, despite the crackling fire. Dominic chose his words with obvious care, but the underlying meaning was unmistakable. The Carter family was not simply wealthy. They were connected to networks that controlled things, politicians, corporations, entire industries, through means that the legitimate world preferred not to acknowledge or examine. He was, in essence, exactly what certain whispered rumors had always suggested, but no one could ever definitively prove: a man of considerable influence in worlds that deliberately preferred to remain hidden. Eleanor's tea grew cold and forgotten in her hands as she listened. She should have been shocked by these revelations. She should have been frightened for her safety. She should have fled immediately from this house and this man and everything he represented. Instead, she experienced a strange and unexpected sense of clarity. This explained so many things that had puzzled her: the fear she had observed in the attorney's trembling hands, the nervous attention Marcus always paid to his father, the way people consistently deferred to Dominic in ways that mere wealth alone could never adequately explain. She had unknowingly married into a family with power she had never imagined existed, and Dominic had watched his wife and daughter systematically destroy her marriage without intervening, until now. She asked the obvious question: why was he telling her these dangerous truths? Dominic's answer was not what she had anticipated. He was telling her because she deserved to understand what she had been part of, even unknowingly. He was telling her because his family had treated her unjustly, and justice mattered deeply to him, even when it conflicted with his own blood. He was telling her because she was stronger than anyone had given her credit for being, and she would need that strength for what was coming next. What was coming next? Elena repeated slowly. Dominic leaned forward in his chair, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. His wife and daughter had not simply wanted her gone because they disapproved of the marriage on social grounds. They had wanted her removed because she had inadvertently witnessed things, overheard conversations, glimpsed documents, been present at moments that could potentially threaten the family's carefully constructed facade of normalcy. Elena struggled to remember what he could possibly mean. What had she seen or heard that was genuinely dangerous? Dominic helped reconstruct her memory. A conversation at a family dinner when Marcus had mentioned a name that made Victoria go visibly pale. A folder left carelessly open on Dominic's desk during a holiday visit, containing photographs Elena had glanced at without comprehending their significance. A late-night phone call that Marcus had taken in the adjacent room, speaking in hushed tones that had disturbed her enough to remember years later. She had witnessed fragments of dangerous truth without recognizing them for what they were, and Victoria had understood that eventually those fragments might assemble themselves into something threatening. The divorce had never been about Elena's supposed inadequacy as a wife. It had been about eliminating a potential threat before she could become an actual one. Elena sat in stunned silence, processing this paradigm-shifting revelation. She had been expelled from her marriage not because she was unloved, but because she was unknowingly dangerous to powerful interests. The sustained cruelty of Victoria and Camilla had not been personal hatred. It had been calculated strategy. Somehow that truth made everything both better and worse simultaneously. She asked Dominic what he expected her to do with this dangerous information. His answer surprised her once again. He expected absolutely nothing from her. She could walk away from this house tonight and never think about the Carters again for the rest of her life. She could take her new existence and build it into something beautiful, far removed from the shadows his family inhabited, or she could choose a different path entirely. Dominic explained that significant changes were coming to the Carter family structure. Victoria and Camilla had grown increasingly reckless, making decisions that threatened the carefully maintained balance that had kept the family safe and prosperous for generations. Marcus, never the brightest or most capable, was being positioned as a puppet for his mother's expanding ambitions. Dominic had spent decades building something substantial, an empire certainly, but also a code. Rules about who could be touched and who remained protected. Limits on the harm that power could inflict upon the innocent. A system that, whatever its moral flaws, at least attempted to contain darkness rather than unleash it, indiscriminately. Victoria wanted to demolish those limits entirely. She wanted power without any restraint, profit without conscience, control without consequence. And Dominic was actively seeking allies for the coming conflict. Elena almost laughed at the apparent absurdity of his suggestion. She was merely an interior designer from Brooklyn. She possessed no power, no useful connections, no understanding of the shadow world Dominic inhabited. What could she possibly offer as a meaningful ally? Dominic anticipated her objection before she could voice it aloud. She possessed something far more valuable than power or connections, he explained. She had knowledge, incomplete but genuinely significant. She had motivation, the righteous anger of someone wronged, waiting to be channeled into purpose. And she had something his family had lost generations ago in their pursuit of power. She still possessed a functioning conscience. The fire crackled in the heavy silence that followed his words. Eleanor thought carefully about everything she had learned tonight, everything she had survived over the past 3 years, everything she had lost, and everything she had unexpectedly found. She thought about Victoria's cold and calculating smile, about Camilla's deliberate cruelty, about Marcus's moral cowardice and complete indifference to her suffering. She thought about all the ways the Carter family had systematically tried to diminish her, erase her, make her feel worthless and disposable. And she thought about Dominic, sitting across from her now, offering her a chance at something she had never dared to imagine, not revenge, something far more complicated and meaningful: justice. She asked what she would need to do to help. Dominic smiled genuinely for the first time that evening, a warm and almost paternal expression. She would need to learn extensively, he explained, to understand the complex world she was choosing to enter, to develop skills and connections that would make her genuinely valuable, to become someone that Victoria and Camilla would never expect or anticipate. It would require significant time, it would demand sacrifice, it would change her in ways she could not possibly predict. But if she was truly willing, he would teach her everything. Elena made her decision without further hesitation. She would learn whatever was necessary. She would grow into whatever was required. She would become whatever she needed to become. And when the time finally arrived, she would help Dominic protect what mattered from those who would destroy it. She extended her hand across the space between them. Dominic took it firmly. In that moment, in that firelit room, Elena Mitchell began the transformation that would define everything that followed. The education began the following week. Elena had expected something dramatic and cinematic, weapons instruction perhaps, or lessons in hand-to-hand combat. The reality proved far more subtle and, in its own particular way, far more demanding than physical training. Dominic sent her books, stacks of them delivered to her apartment without advance warning, covering subjects that seemed to have no obvious connection to each other. Business strategy, psychology, history, art appreciation, philosophy, economics, foreign languages. She was to read them all, he explained during their weekly meetings at the Westchester House. She was to absorb not merely the information they contained, but the distinct ways of thinking they represented. Power, Dominic taught her patiently, was never truly about force. Force was the last desperate resort of those who had failed at everything else. True power came from understanding people deeply, understanding systems thoroughly, understanding the invisible currents that shaped human behavior. Elena threw herself into these studies with the same intensity she had once devoted to her design work. She read until her eyes burned with exhaustion. She took notes until her hand cramped painfully. She asked questions until Dominic's seemingly infinite patience showed occasional signs of strain. She learned to read people accurately, not merely their words, but their bodies, the micro-expressions that revealed hidden emotions, the unconscious gestures that betrayed true intentions. She learned to notice things she had overlooked her entire previous life, the way someone's eyes moved subtly when they lied, the shift in posture. That signaled deep discomfort, the vocal patterns that reliably indicated deception. She practiced on strangers initially, then on colleagues, then on clients. She became, without anyone noticing the transformation, remarkably skilled at understanding what people actually meant beneath what they chose to say. She learned about money in its true complexity, not the simple mathematics of spending and saving that ordinary people understood, but the intricate architecture of real wealth, how it moved invisibly, how it hid from scrutiny, how it multiplied through mechanisms invisible to those without proper education. She learned about shell companies and offshore accounts, and the legal fictions that allowed the wealthy to exist in an entirely different reality than everyone else. She learned about power itself in all its forms, the formal power of institutions, governments, corporations, regulatory bodies with their rules and enforcement mechanisms, the informal power of relationships, who owed whom favors, who feared whom secretly, who needed whom desperately, the invisible power of information, what people knew, what they wanted to know, what they would sacrifice to prevent others from knowing. And she learned the full history of the Carter family. Dominic shared stories from his past, his voice carrying the considerable weight of memories both proud and deeply painful. He described his own father, a man who had built an empire from nothing through methods that would never appear in any authorized biography. He detailed his own rise through organizational ranks, the moral compromises he had made along the way, the lines he had refused to cross despite pressure. He told her about meeting Victoria decades ago. She had been beautiful then, Dominic recalled, possessed of a brightness that had faded over the years into something harder and more calculating. She came from old money, the kind that had learned across generations to hide its sins behind walls of respectability. She had seen in Dominic not a person to love genuinely, but an opportunity to grasp and exploit. Their marriage had been a transaction dressed in the language of romance. She contributed social legitimacy, he contributed resources and connections. Together they constructed a facade of normalcy that concealed the machinery operating beneath. The children had been part of that carefully maintained facade. Camilla, the eldest, had inherited her mother's calculating nature combined with her father's sharp intelligence, a dangerous combination entirely untempered by conscience. Marcus, born 5 years later, had inherited neither quality. He was weak where his sister was strong, passive where she was active, a consistent disappointment that Victoria had never stopped trying to correct. Elena listened to these stories with growing understanding of her own experience. She had been an unwitting pawn in a game she had not known existed. Her marriage to Marcus had been permitted because he needed a wife to maintain proper appearances, and Victoria had assumed Elena would prove easy to control and manipulate. When Elena demonstrated herself more observant than expected, more present at moments that should have remained private, the strategic calculus changed entirely. The divorce had been Victoria's solution to a problem Elena had not known she represented. Now Elena was learning to become a different kind of problem entirely. Spring arrived with its traditional promise of renewal. Elena's days fell into a demanding rhythm: work at the design firm through mornings and afternoons, study during evenings, meetings with Dominic on weekends. She was living 2 entirely separate lives, and the strain showed in the shadows beneath her eyes and the new sharpness defining her cheekbones. Margaret noticed the changes, of course. She inquired whether Elena was sleeping enough, eating enough, taking adequate care of herself. Elena lied with the skill she had been deliberately developing, offering excuses about insomnia and stress that were close enough to truth to pass casual inspection. She felt genuine guilt about the deception. Margaret had shown her nothing but kindness, and Eleanor was repaying that kindness with half-truths and careful misdirection. But she could not explain the real reasons for her exhaustion. She could not share the secret world she was entering, the transformation she was undergoing, the purpose that had begun to fill, the hollow spaces that grief had carved in her soul. She told herself it was temporary, that when this was finally over, whatever this ultimately turned out to be, she would find a way to make everything right. In the meantime, she kept working diligently. She kept learning voraciously. She kept becoming someone entirely new. Dominic introduced her gradually to others in his orbit. There was Catherine, the woman who had first visited Elena's apartment, who proved to be far more than a simple administrative assistant. Catherine served as Dominic's primary intelligence gatherer, responsible for knowing everything about everyone who mattered. She took Elena under her professional wing, teaching her the sophisticated art of research, how to find information, verify it, protect it, and use it effectively. There was Thomas, a lawyer whose practice specialized in problems that could not be solved through conventional legal channels. He taught Elena about leverage, the subtle pressure, points that could influence behavior without requiring overt threats. He was kind in a grandfatherly way, always offering tea and advice in equal and generous measure. There was Marcus, not her ex-husband, but another man who happened to share only the name. This Marcus was responsible for security operations, a former military officer who had found a different form of service in Dominic's organization. He taught Elena situational awareness, how to read any room for potential threats, how to move through the world without becoming a target. And there were others, a rotating cast of characters who appeared at the Westchester house for purposes Elena was not yet authorized to understand. She learned to observe them carefully without appearing to, filing away details that might prove useful later. Weeks became months in steady progression. Elena's design work continued to flourish, providing both professional cover and legitimate income. She led projects for clients who had no idea. Their interior designer spent her nights studying intelligence techniques and her weekends learning the architecture of hidden power. She was changing fundamentally, and not only in skills and knowledge. Her posture had shifted, becoming more confident and contained. Her gaze had sharpened, noticing things that would have escaped her attention entirely a year ago. Her voice had developed new registers, soft when softness was required, firm when firmness served better. She was becoming the person Dominic had recognized potential in, and she was becoming something else as well. She was becoming strategically angry. Not the hot, impulsive anger she had experienced during her marriage, the frustration of being constantly dismissed, the humiliation of being systematically diminished. This was something colder and more patient, more useful, more dangerous. She thought about Victoria, who had orchestrated her destruction with the casual cruelty of someone swatting an annoying insect. She thought about Camilla, who had enjoyed the sport of ruining her reputation. She thought about Marcus, whose cowardice had enabled both women completely. She thought about justice and what it might look like when she was finally ready to claim it. Summer arrived, heavy and humid. Dominic informed her that the time had come for the next phase. He wanted to introduce her formally to the broader network, the alliance of families and organizations that had maintained a certain kind of order in the shadows for decades. A gathering was scheduled, to be held at a neutral location where representatives from various interests would meet to discuss matters of mutual concern. Eleanor would attend as Dominic's personal guest. It represented a considerable risk, he acknowledged. Victoria might be present at the gathering. Camilla almost certainly would attend. Eleanor's appearance at such an exclusive event would raise questions that could not be easily answered. But it also represented a significant opportunity, a chance to establish her presence in a world that did not yet know she existed, a chance to begin building the relationship she would need for whatever came next. Elena agreed without any hesitation. The gathering was held at an estate in upstate New York, a vast property surrounded by dense forest and protected by security that remained invisible until you knew exactly where to look. Eleanor arrived with Dominic in a car driven by one of his most trusted men, watching. The landscape scrolled past with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, elegant but not ostentatious, memorable but not threatening. Catherine had helped her select the outfit, a deep blue dress that suggested both sophistication and mystery. The estate itself was beautiful in an intimidating way. Stone walls covered in climbing ivy, formal gardens stretching toward the distant tree line, a main house that could have served as a museum or a palace. Helena stepped out of the car and drew a deep breath. Whatever transpired tonight would shape everything that followed. Dominic led her inside, his hand resting lightly on her back, guiding her through crowds of people whose faces she had studied in photographs but never expected to meet in person. He introduced her simply as Elena, an associate he was currently mentoring, someone with potential that would reveal itself in time. The reactions varied considerably. Some dismissed her immediately, seeing only a young woman of no obvious importance. Others studied her with open curiosity, wondering what Dominic Carter could possibly see that they were missing. A few, the most observant ones, regarded her with something closer to recognition, as though they sensed she was considerably more than she appeared. Eleanor moved through the gathering like a student, taking an important examination, testing everything she had learned. She read body language and adjusted her own accordingly. She listened considerably more than she spoke, filing away information that might prove valuable later. She smiled when smiles were expected, and remained serious when seriousness was appropriate. She was exhausted within the first hour, but she did not allow it to show. Then she noticed Victoria across the room. Her former mother-in-law stood resplendent in silver as always, holding a champagne flute with the casual elegance of someone who had never known uncertainty. Camilla stood beside her, dressed in red, laughing at something a young man had said. They had not yet noticed Elena's presence. For a suspended moment, she considered avoiding them entirely. The gathering was large enough that she could remain out of their sight, complete the evening without confrontation, save the inevitable encounter for another day. But something within her refused that cautious option. She had spent 3 years being invisible within this family, being dismissed and diminished and made to feel like she did not matter. She had signed away her marriage in a cold conference room while Marcus scrolled through his phone, with casual indifference. She was finished being invisible. Eleanor walked directly toward them. The moment Victoria recognized her was worth every hour of training, every sleepless night of study, every sacrifice she had made to reach this point. Victoria's face cycled rapidly through several distinct emotions: confusion, then recognition, then disbelief, then something that looked remarkably like fear. She quickly smoothed her expression into cold neutrality, but Elena had observed the truth beneath the mask. Victoria was afraid of her, not of what Elena was currently perhaps, but of what Elena represented, a variable that should have been eliminated, a threat that should have been neutralized, a ghost who refused to remain buried. Camilla's reaction proved different, pure hostility, unfiltered and immediate. Her eyes narrowed dangerously, her posture stiffened, her smile transformed into something closer to a snarl. Elena approached them with the calm confidence she had been cultivating for months. She greeted them pleasantly, as though encountering casual acquaintances at a party, rather than the women who had destroyed her marriage and attempted to destroy her life. She complimented Victoria's dress. She inquired after Marcus's health. She made small talk with the practiced ease of someone who had nothing to fear and nothing to prove. Victoria recovered quickly, matching Elena's pleasant tone with her own version of polite warfare. She expressed surprise at encountering Elena at such an exclusive gathering. She wondered aloud who could possibly have sponsored her attendance. She made subtle implications about Elena's right to be present in such distinguished company. Elena parried every thrust with responses that were perfectly cordial and perfectly clear in their underlying message. She belonged here now. She was not leaving, and Victoria would have to accept that reality, however unpleasant she found it. Camilla eventually interrupted, unable to maintain even the pretense of civility. She demanded to know what Elena was doing there. She accused her of crashing the event, of pursuing some pathetic scheme for attention, of refusing to accept her place as a discarded ex-wife with no claim to the Carter name or legacy. The outburst attracted attention from nearby guests. Elena allowed Camilla to finish her tirade, then responded with devastating calm. She was attending as Dominic's personal guest, she explained. She had been invited specifically, welcomed warmly, and treated with the respect that guests at such gatherings deserved. If Camilla had concerns about the invitation list, perhaps she should discuss them with her father. The mention of Dominic landed like a physical blow. Camilla's face went pale. Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculation operating beneath. They had not known. They had not realized that Elena had found an ally, not merely any ally, but the patriarch of their own family. Elena excused herself gracefully, leaving them to process this new and disturbing information. She found Dominic standing by the fireplace, watching the scene with an expression that might have been approval. She asked if she had handled it correctly. He considered the question before answering. She had handled it beautifully, he said. She had demonstrated strength without aggression, confidence without arrogance. She had announced her presence in a way that would be remembered and discussed long after the gathering concluded, but more importantly, she had passed a test she had not known she was taking. She had faced the women who had hurt her most and refused to be diminished by them. She had claimed her place in a world that had tried to exclude her. She had proven to herself as much as to anyone observing that she was no longer the frightened woman who had signed divorce papers with trembling hands. She was someone else entirely now, someone stronger, someone more capable, someone with a future that Victoria and Camilla would have to reckon with. If this moment resonates with you, pause and leave a comment saying, "She is no longer the woman they tried to break." Let me know you are here, witnessing her rise from the ashes of what they destroyed. Autumn returned, painting the trees in shades of fire. Elena had been working with Dominic for a full year now, and her transformation was essentially complete. She moved through the world differently, more aware, more deliberate, more dangerous in ways that remained invisible to casual observers. Her design work continued to provide cover and legitimacy. She had risen to senior designer at Margaret's firm, earning recognition that had nothing to do with the Carter family's influence. Clients requested her specifically. Publications featured her projects. She was building a professional reputation entirely her own, but that represented only half her actual life. The other half existed in shadows. She had learned to gather information, not through dramatic investigations, but through patient observation and careful conversation. She had built a network of contacts throughout the city, people who owed her favors or trusted her discretion. She had become valuable to Dominic in ways that neither of them had initially anticipated. And she had uncovered the truth about Victoria's plans. The intelligence came from multiple sources, fragments that Catherine helped her piece together into a coherent picture. Victoria was making moves within the organization, building alliances, accumulating resources, positioning her supporters in key positions throughout the structure. She was preparing to challenge Dominic's authority directly. The code that Dominic had maintained for decades, the rules about limits and protections, represented an obstacle to Victoria's ambitions. She wanted power without any restraint. She wanted to expand into territories that Dominic had deliberately avoided. She wanted to reshape the entire organization in her own image, and she had allies who shared her vision. Eleanor studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. Victoria's coalition was considerably larger than expected. She had been building it for years, hiding her preparations behind the facade of the dutiful wife, the society hostess, the charitable foundation chair. Dominic had underestimated her. He acknowledged this during one of their weekend meetings, his voice carrying unusual weariness. He had believed Victoria's ambitions were limited to social status and family control. He had not realized she was playing a much longer game. Elena asked what they could do. Dominic's answer was measured and careful. They could not stop Victoria directly. Not yet. She had built too much support among factions that valued profit over principle. A direct confrontation would split the organization, with consequences that could not be predicted or controlled. But they could slow her down. They could expose her most vulnerable supporters. They could demonstrate that challenging Dominic's authority would carry costs that outweighed any potential gains. It would require patience. It would demand precision. It would require Elena to take on a more active role than anything she had done previously. She agreed without hesitation. The campaign began quietly. Elena targeted Victoria's most questionable allies, those whose loyalty was based purely on calculated self-interest rather than genuine conviction. She gathered evidence of their misdeeds, not for public exposure, but for private leverage. She offered them choices: reduce their support for Victoria or face consequences that would damage their interests. Most chose self-preservation. The defections were subtle, gradual, barely noticeable at first. Victoria's coalition shrank not through dramatic betrayals, but through quiet repositioning. Supporters who had been enthusiastic became hesitant. Allies who had been committed became neutral. The momentum she had been building began to slow. Victoria noticed, of course. She was too intelligent not to recognize what was happening. But she could not identify the source. The campaign was designed to look like natural political evolution, factions shifting, interests realigning, nothing that could be traced back to a specific adversary. Elena watched from the shadows, satisfied with the progress, but knowing it was not enough. Victoria would adapt. She would find new allies to replace those she had lost. She would adjust her strategy to account for this unexpected resistance. The campaign had bought time, but it had not solved the underlying problem. Something more decisive would be needed. Winter came early that year, bringing cold that seemed to seep into everything. Elena received word from Catherine that Victoria was planning something significant. A meeting with representatives from outside the organization, people who had no history with Dominic's code, no reason to respect his limits. If Victoria succeeded in bringing them into the fold, the balance of power would shift irrevocably. Dominic called an emergency gathering at the Westchester house. Eleanor arrived to find the atmosphere tense. Thomas was there, and Catherine and Marcus, the security chief, and several others she had come to know over the past year. They gathered in the sitting room where Elena had first learned the truth about the Carter family, the fire in the hearth doing little to warm the chill that hung in the air. Dominic laid out the situation in stark terms. Victoria's meeting was scheduled for the following week. If it proceeded as planned, she would secure commitments that would make her position unassailable. The code that Dominic had maintained would become meaningless. The organization would transform into something he no longer recognized. He had one chance to prevent it. The meeting location had been kept secret, but Catherine's sources had provided a lead. With enough intelligence, they could disrupt the gathering, not through confrontation, but through exposure. If the right information reached the right people at the right time, Victoria's potential allies would reconsider their involvement. But gathering that intelligence required access that none of Dominic's current people possessed. He turned to Elena. Victoria would never expect her former daughter-in-law to have connections in those circles. Elena's background, her design work, her social presence, her seemingly innocent profile made her perfect for the kind of reconnaissance they needed. It was dangerous. If Victoria discovered what Elena was doing, the consequences would be severe, but it was also necessary. Elena considered the request carefully. This was different from anything she had done before. Gathering intelligence through observation and conversation was one thing. Deliberately infiltrating Victoria's operation was another entirely. She thought about the risk. She thought about the potential cost of failure, and she thought about everything Victoria had done, not just to her, but to everyone who had stood in the way of her ambitions over the years. She thought about the limits Dominic had maintained, the protections his code provided, the order he had built from chaos. She thought about justice and what it demanded. She agreed to do it. The preparation was intense. Catherine briefed her on everything they knew about Victoria's potential allies, their backgrounds, their interests, their vulnerabilities. Thomas provided legal cover for any complications that might arise. Marcus arranged security that would remain invisible unless needed. Elena developed a strategy. She would approach the situation through her design work. One of Victoria's potential allies owned a property that needed renovation. She had learned this through careful research. She would offer her services, building a relationship that would give her access to information they needed. It was a simple plan, which made it more likely to succeed. The approach went smoothly. The property owner, a man named Richard, whose legitimate businesses concealed less legitimate activities, was receptive to Elena's proposal. He was intrigued by her portfolio, impressed by her reputation, pleased by the attention from someone he considered far outside his usual social circle. Elena cultivated the relationship with patient skill. She visited the property multiple times, making notes about design possibilities while observing everything else. She attended social events where Richard and his associates gathered, building connections that would seem innocent to anyone watching. And slowly, carefully, she gathered the intelligence she needed. The meeting location was confirmed, a private estate in Connecticut owned by one of Victoria's most trusted supporters. The date and time were verified. The list of expected attendees was assembled. Elena delivered her report to Dominic with a mixture of pride and anxiety. He received it gravely, studying the details with an intensity that revealed how much was riding on the information she had provided. This was excellent work, he told her, better than he had hoped. She had proven herself in ways that few people ever did, and she had done it without compromising her values or losing herself in the process. But there was one more thing he needed from her. The disruption of Victoria's meeting required someone on the inside, someone who could ensure the right information reached the right people at the critical moment. Someone Victoria would never suspect. He was asking Elena to attend the meeting itself. She understood immediately what that meant. She would be walking into the heart of Victoria's operation, surrounded by people who had every reason to want her, neutralized if they discovered her true purpose. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever been asked to do. It was also the most important. Eleanor took a deep breath and gave her answer. She would do it. The Connecticut estate sprawled across hundreds of acres, surrounded by forests that provided both beauty and isolation. Eleanor arrived at the gates in a car that Richard had sent for her, her cover story well rehearsed, her true purpose carefully hidden. She was attending as Richard's guest. His new interior designer, recently engaged to help him with a major renovation project. It was a believable reason for her presence, one that Victoria would have no cause to question. Or so she hoped. The main house rose from the landscape like a monument to old money and older secrets. Elena stepped out of the car and studied it with professional appreciation that was not entirely feigned. It was beautiful in an intimidating way, all stone and glass and careful landscaping. Richard met her at the entrance, solicitous and charming as always. He introduced her to other guests, explaining her presence with casual ease. A designer he was working with, very talented, worth getting to know. Eleanor smiled and made small talk, all while cataloguing everything she observed. Victoria arrived an hour later. She swept into the gathering with the imperious grace that had always been her signature, dressed in silver as always, commanding attention without seeming to seek it. Camilla was with her, and several others Elena recognized from Dominic's intelligence files. Victoria's eyes found Elena almost immediately. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the crowded room. Elena refused to be the first to look away. Victoria's expression shifted through several phases, surprise, suspicion, calculation, before settling into cold neutrality. She approached Elena with the measured stride of someone who had decided to handle a situation directly. She asked what Elena was doing there. Elena explained about Richard, about the design project, about the fortunate timing that had led to this invitation. She kept her voice pleasant and her body language relaxed, projecting the innocence of someone who had nothing to hide. Victoria clearly did not believe her, but she also could not prove anything. Eleanor's cover was solid, her presence legitimately explained. Without evidence of deception, Victoria had no grounds to demand her removal. She issued a warning instead, her voice soft enough that nearby guests would not overhear. Whatever Elena was planning, Victoria said, it would fail. She had underestimated the Carter family once, and it had cost her everything. She should not make the same mistake again. Elena's response was equally quiet. She was not planning anything, she said. She was simply living her life, pursuing her career, accepting invitations from clients who wanted her company. If Victoria saw threats in such innocent activities, perhaps that said more about Victoria's conscience than Elena's intentions. They parted with smiles that fooled no one. The meeting began that evening, held in a grand salon that had been cleared of furniture and filled with chairs arranged in a circle. Elena was not invited to attend. Richard explained that it was for principals only, nothing personal, but she found reasons to be nearby. A design question about the adjoining room, a need to verify measurements, a curiosity about the original architectural details. She observed what she could through doorways and windows. She listened when conversations carried. She noted who spoke with passion and who spoke with calculation, who seemed committed and who seemed uncertain. And when the moment was right, she acted. The information she had gathered in the preceding weeks, evidence of certain attendees' vulnerabilities, proof of statements they had made that their associates would find troubling, was delivered through carefully prepared channels. It arrived at phones and computers around the room in a cascade that seemed coincidental, but was anything but. Elena watched the meeting dissolve. Accusations began flying within minutes. Alliances fractured as attendees confronted each other with revelations they had not expected to face. Victoria tried to restore order, but the damage was done. The carefully planned gathering devolved into chaos. Elena slipped away while everyone was distracted, making her excuses to Richard with apologies about an emergency back in the city. He barely noticed her departure, too focused on the dramatic collapse of what should have been a triumphant event. She was in a car heading back to New York before Victoria realized she was gone. The aftermath played out over the following weeks. Victoria's coalition splintered as word of the disastrous meeting spread through the organization. Her potential allies withdrew their interest, unwilling to associate with someone who could not even manage a simple gathering. Her position weakened dramatically, though she remained dangerous enough to require continued vigilance. Dominic received the news with quiet satisfaction. He had known, from the moment he first offered Elena his card, that she had potential beyond what anyone else could see. He had known that beneath the wounded woman signing divorce papers was someone capable of extraordinary things. He had not known just how extraordinary she would prove to be. Their relationship had evolved over the year of working together. What had begun as mentorship had become something more complex, a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Dominic valued Elena's judgment, sought her counsel, trusted her with responsibilities that he gave to no one else. And Elena had come to care for him in return, not romantically, that had never been a possibility, but as a father figure, a guide, a source of wisdom and support that she had not known she needed until she found it. He was the family she had always wanted, the family she had thought she was joining when she married Marcus. The irony was not lost on her. Spring came again, bringing warmth and renewal. Elena's 31st birthday arrived with little fanfare. She celebrated quietly. Dinner with Margaret and a few friends from work, cake and champagne, and laughter about nothing in particular. None of them knew what she had become. None of them suspected the double life she led, the secrets she kept, the power she had accumulated. She preferred it that way, but there were changes coming that would make secrecy more difficult. Dominic had been preparing for a transition. The events of the past months had accelerated his timeline, forcing him to confront questions he had been avoiding. He was not immortal. His health, while currently stable, would not remain so forever. The organization he had built needed leadership that would preserve its values through whatever challenges lay ahead. He had considered his options carefully. Victoria was impossible. Her ambitions had been checked but not eliminated. Given power, she would pursue the same agenda that had nearly torn the organization apart. Marcus, his son Marcus, was equally impossible. He had neither the capability nor the desire for such responsibility. He was content with his comfortable life, his social obligations, his meaningless relationships. Camilla was the most dangerous option. She had her mother's ambition and her grandfather's intelligence, combined with a ruthlessness that exceeded both. Under her leadership, the organization would become something monstrous. There were others, of course, loyal lieutenants, trusted advisors, capable people who had served faithfully for years, but none of them had the combination of qualities that true leadership required. None of them, except Eleanor. He presented the idea to her on a Sunday afternoon at the Westchester house, spring sunlight streaming through the windows as though blessing their conversation. He wanted her to succeed him. Not immediately, so there was still much to learn, much to prepare, but eventually, when the time came, she would take his place at the head of the organization. She would become the guardian of the code he had maintained. She would ensure that power remained constrained by principle. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, processing what he was suggesting. Her first instinct was to refuse. She was an interior designer from Brooklyn. She had stumbled into this world by accident, stayed out of anger and curiosity, contributed what she could without ever expecting to lead. But as she considered the proposal more carefully, she began to see what Dominic saw. She had proven herself capable, more capable than anyone had expected. She understood the organization, its members, its challenges. She had earned respect from people who did not give it easily, and she cared about the right things, not power for its own sake, not wealth or status or control. She cared about justice, about protection, about maintaining limits on what power could do to the powerless. She was exactly what the organization needed. She asked for time to think. Dominic granted it without hesitation. This was not a decision to be made lightly. She should consider every aspect, every implication, every sacrifice that would be required. But he hoped she would say yes. Elena spent the following days in a state of distracted contemplation. She went through the motions of her normal life, design meetings, client presentations, ordinary activities that felt increasingly disconnected from the extraordinary choice she faced. She thought about what accepting would mean. It would mean committing to this world completely, abandoning any possibility of returning to a normal life. It would mean becoming someone her former self would barely recognize. It would mean carrying responsibilities that would shape not just her future, but the futures of countless others. It would mean becoming a Carter in a way that her marriage had never accomplished. The irony continued to compound. But she also thought about what refusing would mean. It would mean walking away from everything she had built over the past year, abandoning the purpose that had given her life meaning, leaving the organization to face an uncertain future, potentially under leadership that would destroy everything Dominic had created. It would mean letting Victoria win. That last thought crystallized everything. Elena had been betrayed by the Carter family. She had been discarded, diminished, treated as worthless by people who had never bothered to see her true value. She had survived. She had transformed. She had become someone extraordinary against all odds. And now she had the chance to determine what the Carter legacy would ultimately become. She returned to the Westchester house the following Sunday and gave Dominic her answer. Yes. 2 years passed. Elena's transformation, from protégé to leader, progressed through careful stages. She took on more responsibilities, made more decisions, built more relationships throughout the organization. She proved herself repeatedly, earning trust through competence and judgment and unwavering commitment to the principles Dominic had established. Her design career evolved into something different, a consulting practice that gave her flexibility and legitimacy, without demanding the constant attention her previous work had required. She maintained connections in that world, using them when useful, enjoying them when possible. But her true work was elsewhere. Victoria watched from a diminished position, her ambitions contained but not extinguished. She had accepted defeat with a grace that Elena found suspicious, too composed, too patient, too willing to wait for another opportunity. Camilla had distanced herself from her mother's failures, pursuing her own agenda through channels that required separate monitoring. She was building something independent, though its ultimate purpose remained unclear. Marcus had divorced his girlfriend and married another one, continuing his pattern of relationships that provided neither substance nor satisfaction. He seemed content with superficiality, untouched by the currents that moved around him. Eleanor encountered them occasionally at public events, galas, charity functions, the social obligations that wealthy families could not avoid. She treated them with professional courtesy that concealed nothing and revealed nothing. They had ceased to have power over her. That realization had arrived gradually, settling into certainty over months of work and growth. The people who had once defined her through their rejection no longer had any claim on her identity. She was not the woman they had discarded. She was someone entirely new, shaped by her own choices and her own efforts. She was free. The transition of leadership happened quietly, without announcement or ceremony. Dominic's health had begun to decline, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The organization's senior members had been prepared, briefed, brought to acceptance of what was coming. When the moment arrived, they knew what to do. Elena assumed her new role with the calm confidence that had become her signature. She honored Dominic's code, maintaining the limits and protections he had established. She built on his foundation, adapting to new challenges while preserving core principles. She led with a combination of strength and compassion that earned loyalty from those who served under her, and she protected those who needed protection. The organization under her guidance became something that Dominic would have been proud of. An empire that wielded power with restraint, that maintained order without cruelty, that defended the weak against the strong. It was not perfect. No institution built by humans could be, but it was better than it had been before, and it continued to improve under her steady hand. Victoria made one final attempt to challenge her authority. It came 3 years after Eleanor's ascension, when Victoria believed enough time had passed for old wounds to heal and new alliances to form. She assembled a coalition of the discontented, those who chafed under Elena's principled leadership, and launched a campaign to discredit and replace her. Elena crushed it systematically, not through confrontation or intimidation, but through the same methods that had served her from the beginning: information, leverage, strategic exposure of vulnerabilities. She dismantled Victoria's coalition piece by piece, turning allies against each other, revealing the true costs of rebellion. When it was over, Victoria was isolated completely. Eleanor visited her former mother-in-law one final time, meeting her in the sitting room of the Connecticut estate, where so much had happened years before. Victoria was older now, her silver elegance faded into brittleness. She sat rigidly in her chair, refusing to show weakness even in defeat. Elena studied her with something that might have been pity. She told Victoria that the campaign against her was finished, that there would be no more attempts to seize power, no more schemes to undermine her authority. The organization belonged to Elena now, and it would continue to belong to her for as long as she chose to lead it. But she was not there to gloat. She was there to offer Victoria a choice. Victoria could accept her defeat gracefully. She could withdraw from organizational affairs entirely, living out her remaining years in comfortable irrelevance. She would retain her wealth, her social status, her freedom, or she could continue fighting. In which case Elena would expose everything, not just Victoria's schemes within the organization, but her dealings with outside parties, her financial irregularities, her years of manipulation and maneuvering. The exposure would destroy Victoria's reputation, her standing, everything she had built over decades of careful cultivation. The choice was hers. Victoria's face went through a familiar sequence of emotions, rage, calculation, desperation, before settling into resignation. She accepted defeat. Elena left the estate without looking back. Time continued to pass. Elena built a life that integrated her various roles into something approaching wholeness. She maintained friendships, pursued interests, found moments of joy amid the responsibilities she carried. She was not entirely happy. Happiness seemed too simple a concept for someone living the life she had chosen. But she was fulfilled. She thought often about the woman she had been before Marcus Carter had entered her life. That woman seemed like a stranger now, naive, trusting, so desperate for belonging that she had ignored every warning sign. That woman had believed love could conquer all obstacles, that families would accept her if she proved herself worthy, that good intentions would be enough to guarantee good outcomes. Eleanor had learned better, but she had not become bitter. The journey from that naive woman to who she was now had given her something valuable. Clarity about what mattered, wisdom about how power worked, determination to use her position for purposes that aligned with her deepest values. She had been betrayed by her husband's family. She had signed the divorce, not knowing her father-in-law was the figure she now understood him to be. And from that betrayal, from that ignorance, from that painful beginning, she had built something extraordinary. The ending was not what anyone had expected. It was better. On a spring evening, 5 years after her ascension, Eleanor stood at the window of the Westchester house, her house now, though she still thought of it as Dominic's. The garden was blooming, flowers that he had planted years before bursting into color as they did every spring. The sky was painted, with sunset, shades of gold and rose that seemed too beautiful to be real. She thought about everything she had survived, everything she had become, everything that lay ahead. The woman who had signed divorce papers with trembling hands no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, more capable than that frightened woman could have imagined becoming. She had turned betrayal into transformation, pain into purpose, weakness into unshakable strength, and she had proven to herself and to everyone who had ever doubted her that she was worthy of respect, not because of who she married, but because of who she chose to become. The story that had begun in a cold conference room ended here, in warmth and light and hard-won peace. Elena Mitchell had found her home, not in a family that had never wanted her, but in a legacy she had helped to build. Not in the love of a man who could not see her value, but in the knowledge of her own worth. Not in the acceptance of people who had tried to destroy her, but in the self-acceptance that came from surviving everything they had thrown at her. She was complete. The spring air carried the scent of flowers through the open window, sweet and fresh and full of promise. Elena breathed it in deeply, feeling gratitude for this moment and all the moments that had led to it. She had been betrayed by her husband's family. She had signed the divorce, not knowing her father-in-law was the figure who would change everything. And she had emerged from that darkness into light. Her story was one of resilience, of transformation, of justice long delayed but finally achieved. It was a story of a woman who refused to be defined by how others had treated her. It was a story of power claimed and used for purposes greater than personal gain. It was her story, and it was complete. If you have watched this far, it is because you truly enjoyed this story. Leave a comment saying, "I have watched this far, so I can get to know you," and see who really appreciates the stories here on the channel. Your comments mean everything to me and help me understand that these stories are reaching hearts that value them. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something genuine, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another journey like this one. Leave a like to help others discover these stories and share this video with someone who needs to know that transformation is always possible, no matter how dark the beginning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching until the end. Thank you for believing in stories that honor resilience, redemption, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. Until the next story.